The National Electrical Code, or NEC, addresses the mounting height of circuit breakers specifically in section 404.80. This section states that if a circuit breaker is used as a switch in 120-volt fluorescent lighting circuits, its highest position above the floor or working platform shall not exceed 6ft 7in. However, the key phrase here is used as a switch. If the circuit breaker's primary function is overcurrent protection and not used for regular on or off switching, then the height restriction in 404.80 does not apply. Another relevant section is 404.11, which states that circuit breakers shall be readily accessible and located to provide ready identification and convenient operation. This section doesn't impose a specific height restriction like 404.80 but focuses on accessibility and ease of use. Readily accessible implies that the circuit breaker should be easily reached without requiring the use of tools, ladders, or the removal of obstacles. Convenient operation means that the circuit breaker should be easy to operate, without requiring excessive force or awkward maneuvering. So, to summarize firstly, if a circuit breaker is used as a switch, especially in 120-volt fluorescent lighting circuits, it must be mounted no higher than 6ft 7in according to NEC section 404.80. Secondly, if a circuit breaker is primarily used for overcurrent protection and not as a switch, the height restriction in 404.80 does not apply. However, the circuit breaker must still be readily accessible and conveniently operated, as required by 404.11. Even if the height restriction of 404.80 doesn't apply, it's important to consider other factors that could affect accessibility and ease of operation. For example, if the circuit breaker is mounted very high, it may be difficult for some individuals to reach, even with a step stool. Similarly, if the circuit breaker is located in a cluttered or poorly lit area, it may be difficult to identify and operate. Consider the specific application and the needs of the people who will be using the electrical system. If there are concerns about accessibility or ease of operation, it may be necessary to lower the mounting height of the circuit breaker, even if it's not required by code. Also, remember that local codes and regulations may have additional requirements regarding the mounting height of circuit breakers. Always check with the local authority having jurisdiction, or OJ, to ensure compliance with all applicable codes and regulations. Ultimately, the goal is to ensure that circuit breakers are mounted in a way that is both safe and convenient for the people who will be using the electrical system. This often requires a balancing act between complying with code requirements and addressing the specific needs of the application. In situations where a circuit breaker is mounted above 6ft 7in but is not used as a switch, ensure that appropriate measures are in place to maintain accessibility. This might include providing a permanent ladder or platform, or using remote operation capabilities if available. It's also important to clearly label the circuit breaker to ensure that it can be easily identified. The labeling should include the circuit number, the equipment it serves, and any other relevant information. Proper documentation of the circuit breaker's location and function is essential for maintenance and troubleshooting purposes. Keep in mind that the interpretation and application of the NEC can vary, so it's always a good idea to consult with a qualified electrical inspector or engineer if you have any questions or concerns. It's also worth noting that the NEC is updated every 3 years, so it's important to stay up to date on the latest changes. Changes can affect the requirements for mounting circuit breakers, as well as other aspects of electrical installations. Failure to comply with the latest code requirements can result in safety hazards and code violations. To avoid these problems, make sure you are always working with the most current version of the NEC. Consider using a circuit breaker lockout device. This prevents accidental or unauthorized operation of the circuit breaker. It is especially important if the circuit breaker is located in a public area or an area where unauthorized personnel may have access. Circuit breaker lockout devices are available in a variety of styles and sizes to fit different types of circuit breakers. Select a device that is compatible with the circuit breaker you are using and that provides adequate security. When installing a circuit breaker, always follow the manufacturer's instructions. The manufacturer's instructions will provide important information about the proper installation and operation of the circuit breaker. Failure to follow the manufacturer's instructions can result in safety hazards and code violations. It's also important to use the correct tools and equipment when installing circuit breakers. Using the wrong tools or equipment can damage the circuit breaker or cause injury. Make sure you have the necessary tools and equipment before you start the installation process. After installing a circuit breaker, always test it to ensure that it is working properly. The test should verify that the circuit breaker is able to trip under overload and short circuit conditions. If the circuit breaker does not trip properly, it should be replaced immediately. Regularly inspect circuit breakers to ensure that they are in good condition. Look for signs of damage, such as cracks, corrosion, or loose connections. If you find any damage, the circuit breaker should be replaced immediately. Circuit breakers should also be tested periodically to ensure that they are still working properly. The frequency of testing will depend on the application and the environment. In general, circuit breakers should be tested at least once a year. A qualified electrician should perform the testing. In summary, mounting a circuit breaker above 6ft 7in is permissible if it's not used as a switch, provided it remains readily accessible and conveniently operable. Adherence to NEC 404.11 and local regulations, along with careful consideration of accessibility, labeling, and regular maintenance, ensures safety and compliance at electrical installations. When determining the mounting height of electrical equipment, there are several important factors to consider. Firstly, accessibility. As previously discussed, the equipment must be readily accessible for operation and maintenance. This means that it should be easy to reach without requiring the use of ladders, tools, or other special equipment. Secondly, safety. The equipment should be mounted in a location where it is not likely to be damaged or cause injury. For example, it should not be mounted in a damp or corrosive environment. Thirdly, convenience. The equipment should be mounted in a location where it is easy to operate and maintain. For example, it should not be mounted in a dark or cluttered area. Fourth, aesthetics. The equipment should be mounted in a location where it is aesthetically pleasing. For example, it should not be mounted in a prominent location where it will detract from the overall appearance of the building. Fifth, code requirements. The equipment must be mounted in accordance with all applicable code requirements. This includes the NEC, as well as local codes and regulations. By considering these factors, you can ensure that electrical equipment is mounted in a way that is safe, convenient, and code compliant. In addition to the factors listed above, there are also some specific considerations that apply to circuit breakers. Firstly, type of circuit breaker. The type of circuit breaker will affect the mounting height. For example, some circuit breakers are designed to be mounted on a panel board, while others are designed to be mounted on a wall. Secondly, size of circuit breaker. The size of the circuit breaker will also affect the mounting height. Larger circuit breakers will require more space and may need to be mounted higher off the ground. Thirdly, voltage of circuit breaker. The voltage of the circuit breaker will also affect the mounting height. Higher voltage circuit breakers may need to be mounted higher off the ground to prevent accidental contact. Fourth, location of circuit breaker. The location of the circuit breaker will also affect the mounting height. For example, if the circuit breaker is located in a wet or damp area, it may need to be mounted higher off the ground to prevent corrosion. Fifth, purpose of circuit breaker. The purpose of the circuit breaker will also affect the mounting height. For example, if the circuit breaker is used to protect a critical piece of equipment, it may need to be mounted at a location where it is easily accessible in case of an emergency. Another important point to consider is the working space around the electrical equipment. The NEC requires that there be adequate working space around electrical equipment to allow for safe operation and maintenance. The amount of working space required will depend on the voltage of the equipment and the location of the equipment. The working space must be clear of obstructions and must be properly illuminated. Finally, it is important to remember that the mounting height of electrical equipment is not the only factor that affects safety and compliance. It is also important to ensure that the equipment is properly installed, maintained, and operated. By following all applicable code requirements and best practices, you can help to ensure that electrical equipment is safe and reliable. When dealing with electrical systems, it is always important to consult with a qualified electrician or electrical engineer. They can provide expert advice and guidance on the proper installation, maintenance, and operation of electrical equipment. They can also help you to understand and comply with all applicable code requirements.